The fluorescent lights flickered above the prison corridor, humming like tired insects that never slept. It was just past 11 at night inside FCI Florence, Arizona, when Miguel Rivera slowly lowered himself to his knees on the cold concrete floor of cell 47, his palms pressed together, his eyes closed. "Jesus," he whispered. Metal boots stopped outside the bars. Officer James Thornton stood there, towering, his shadow cutting across the cell like a blade. He tapped his baton against the steel once, twice, deliberately. "Still praying. Rivera?" Thornton scoffed. "Your God isn't real. If he were, you wouldn't be here." Miguel didn't answer. He just kept praying. What Thornton didn't know, what no one could have imagined, was that before this night was over, a man dressed in white would walk down that hallway and call James Thornton by name. If you've ever felt trapped in an unfair situation, if you've ever been angry at God because life hurt too much, this story is for you. Stay with us until the end. And if stories like this strengthen your faith, make sure to subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us for more true-to-the-heart stories of hope, justice, and grace. Before prison numbers replaced his name, before steel bars and concrete floors became his world, Miguel Rivera was just an ordinary man living an ordinary life in Tucson, Arizona. He was 42 years old, with calloused hands and a permanent tiredness in his eyes, the kind that came from honest work and long hours. Miguel worked nights as a janitor at a shopping mall on the south side of the city, cleaning floors that would be dirty again by morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. He lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment with his wife Rosa and their 2 children. Mateo was 9, curious and restless, always asking questions. Lucia was 6, quiet and observant, rarely letting go of her father's hand. Their life wasn't easy. Money was always tight. Miguel often picked up double shifts, and Rosa worked part-time when she could. But the apartment was filled with laughter, routine, and something else, something quieter. Faith. Miguel wasn't loud about it. He didn't preach. He didn't argue religion with strangers. His faith lived in small, consistent habits. A whispered prayer before meals. A Bible on the nightstand, pages worn thin. Every night before bed, he gathered the family, held their hands, and thanked God for another day. On October 18th, everything seemed normal. Miguel clocked out just after sunset. The Arizona sky burned orange and purple as he slung his backpack over one shoulder and walked toward the bus stop, earbuds in, listening to soft Christian music. He was thinking about Mateo's math test, about Lucia's missing shoe, about how tired Rosa had looked that morning. He never noticed the young man who brushed past him, never felt the slight tug at his backpack, never knew that in a matter of minutes, his entire life, his freedom, his family, his reputation would be taken from him. Miguel Rivera went to work that night as a free man. He would not come home for nearly a year. The bus stop sat beneath a flickering streetlight, humming softly against the cooling desert air. Miguel leaned against the metal bench, his backpack resting open at his side, one strap loosened from a long shift. He removed his earbuds, rubbing his temples, already thinking about sleep. That was when the sirens came. At first, he thought they were passing by, another routine call somewhere else in the city, but the sound grew louder, closer. Tires screeched. Red and blue lights washed over the sidewalk, painting the concrete in violent flashes. 2 patrol cars stopped abruptly in front of him. "Hands up, now!" a voice shouted. Miguel froze. His heart slammed against his ribs as instinct kicked in. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, confusion written across his face. "What's going on?" he asked. "Did I do something?" An officer rushed forward, shoved him against the wall, and began searching him with practiced force. Miguel's cheek pressed against cold brick as his mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Another officer grabbed the backpack. Miguel turned his head. "That's mine, but I didn't." The zipper opened. Silence followed. Then came a sharp intake of breath. Inside the bag were items Miguel had never seen before. An unmistakable gold Rolex, 2 diamond bracelets, and a pearl necklace, each one gleaming under the flashing lights like evidence waiting to be judged. "Where did you get these?" the officer demanded. Miguel's stomach dropped. I don't know," he stammered. "Those aren't mine. I swear. Someone must have—" "Save it," the officer snapped. 30 minutes earlier, a jewelry store inside the mall had been robbed. A man wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap had smashed a display case, grabbed the most expensive items, and fled on foot. Security footage showed him running through a side exit, and now those same items were sitting inside Miguel Rivera's backpack. The handcuffs closed around his wrist with a metallic click that echoed louder than the sirens ever had. Miguel's pulse roared in his ears. "Please," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't steal anything. I've never been in trouble before. You can check. I work there. I clean the floors." The officers exchanged a look that said they had heard this speech too many times. "Everyone says that," one replied. As they pushed him into the back of the patrol car, Miguel caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. Wide eyes, sweat on his forehead, a man who looked guilty simply because he was scared. At the station, the questions came fast. "Why were you near the mall? Why did the suspect match your description? Why were the stolen items in your possession?" Miguel answered every question the same way. Calm at first, then desperate. "I was walking home. I didn't see anyone. I was set up." Hours passed. The room felt smaller. The air grew heavier. By the time they led him to a holding cell, Miguel's hope was already thinning. He sat on the bench, head in his hands, whispering the only words that still felt solid. "God, you know the truth." Outside the cell, paperwork was filed. To the system, the case was simple. The evidence was already in the bag. Miguel spent the night in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and stale sweat. The bench was hard, the light overhead never turned off, and every few minutes a door slammed somewhere down the corridor. He tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't slow down. By morning, he was exhausted. A detective finally came for him just after sunrise. The man was polite but distant, his questions delivered in a flat, rehearsed tone that left no room for hope. "You were seen leaving the mall around the time of the robbery," the detective said, sliding a folder across the table. "Security footage shows a man with your build and clothing." "That wasn't me," Miguel replied immediately. "I work there. I clean floors. I was walking to the bus stop." "And the stolen jewelry?" the detective pressed. Miguel swallowed. "Someone put it in my backpack. I didn't see it happen." The detective sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Rivera, do you know how many times I hear that?" Miguel's hands trembled as he folded them in front of him. "I know how it sounds, but I've never stolen anything in my life. I have kids, a family." The detective closed the folder. "That may be true, but right now, the evidence doesn't look good for you." 2 days later, Miguel stood in a small courtroom for his arraignment. The judge read the charges: aggravated robbery, a felony that carried serious time. Bail was set at $50,000. Miguel felt the number hit him like a punch. There was no way they could afford that. Rosa tried. She called relatives, old friends, anyone who might help. But the answer was always the same: sympathy without money. Miguel was assigned a public defender named Mark Ellis, a young attorney with tired eyes and a stack of files that never seemed to shrink. Their first meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. "I'll be honest with you," Ellis said, flipping through Miguel's case. "This isn't great." "But I didn't do it," Miguel insisted. "There has to be something. Another suspect. Better footage." Ellis held up a hand. "I believe you believe that. But juries don't decide based on belief. They decide based on what they can see." He pointed to the photos of the jewelry laid out on a table. "They see this in your backpack. They see video that kind of looks like you. That's usually enough." Miguel felt a cold fear settle in his chest. "So what happens now?" Ellis hesitated. "The prosecutor is offering a deal. Plead guilty, 3 years. With good behavior, maybe less." Miguel stared at him. "You want me to admit to something I didn't do? I want you to think about your family. Ellis replied quietly. If you go to trial and lose, you could get 10 years, maybe more. That night, alone in his cell, Miguel pressed his forehead against the wall and prayed harder than he ever had before. God, I didn't do this, he whispered. You know I didn't. Please, don't let the truth disappear. At the next meeting, Ellis asked him again. Miguel shook his head. I won't lie. I won't teach my children that truth doesn't matter. The public defender exhaled slowly. None. Then we go to trial. And just like that, the system moved forward, not because it was certain Miguel was guilty, but because it was convinced he was expendable. The trial began on a Monday morning under a sky so clear it felt cruel. Miguel entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed at his waist. The sound of chains followed every step he took. He searched the room until he found Rosa, sitting in the front row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed red from nights without sleep. Their children weren't there. Rosa couldn't bring herself to let them see their father like this. The prosecutor spoke first, confident, precise. He laid out the story as if it were already settled fact. A man matching Miguel's description, fleeing a jewelry store, stolen items found in his backpack minutes later. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor said, holding up a photograph of the jewelry, this case is simple. The defendant was caught with the evidence in his possession. Miguel listened, heart pounding, as if the words were physically pressing him into the chair. When it was the defense's turn, Mark Ellis stood and did his best with what he had. He argued that there were no fingerprints on the jewelry, that the security footage was blurry, that no one had actually seen Miguel commit the crime. Someone else could have placed those items in his backpack, Ellis said. Mistaken identity is not justice. But even as he spoke, Miguel could hear the weakness in the argument. It sounded thin, desperate. Witnesses from the jewelry store testified. None could say with certainty that Miguel was the man who robbed them, but each one said the same thing. He looked similar. That word echoed in Miguel's mind. Similar. The jury watched the footage again and again. A man in a dark jacket, a cap pulled low, running. Miguel sat still, barely breathing. On the third day, Rosa took the stand. Her voice shook as she described Miguel as a devoted husband and father, and a man who worked hard and prayed every night. The prosecutor approached gently. Mrs. Rivera, he asked, did your husband ever tell you how those items ended up in his backpack? Rosa hesitated. Miguel saw it, the pause that lasted half a second too long. He said he didn't know, she replied. But you don't know for sure, do you? The prosecutor pressed. Rosa's eyes flicked toward Miguel, then away. No, she whispered. That moment hurt more than the handcuffs ever could. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Miguel prayed silently the entire time, repeating the same words over and over. Please, please, please. When the jury returned, the courtroom felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were closing in. The foreperson stood. We find the defendant guilty, Rosa cried out. Miguel felt something inside him tear loose. The room spun. He gripped the table to keep from falling. A week later, he stood before the judge again for sentencing. For the crime of aggravated robbery, the judge said, voice neutral, this court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison. The gavel struck. Miguel closed his eyes. God, he whispered, barely audible. You know I'm innocent. Please don't abandon me now. As deputies led him away, Rosa remained seated, staring forward, unsure of what she believed anymore. And just like that, Miguel Rivera stopped being a husband who worked nights and prayed quietly. He became inmate Rivera, a number, a file, another man swallowed by a system that had already moved on. The bus ride to FCI Florence took hours, but it felt longer. Miguel sat shackled at the wrists and ankles, surrounded by other men in orange, the engine's low growl mixing with the clink of chains every time the bus hit a bump. No one spoke much. Some stared straight ahead. Others slept with their heads against the window. Miguel watched the desert roll by, endless and unforgiving, and wondered if it was meant to prepare him for what was coming. When the bus finally stopped, the doors opened to a wall of concrete, razor wire, and steel gates stacked one after another like warnings. Guards barked orders. Names were called. Numbers were assigned. Miguel Rivera became Yararif 78421. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and metal. Doors slammed with a finality that rattled his chest. The noise never really stopped. Shouting down corridors, radios crackling, distant arguments breaking out and fading just as quickly. A correctional officer led him to Cellblock. "Cell 47, the officer said flatly, unlocking the bars. Miguel stepped inside. The cell was small, 2 bunks welded to the wall, a steel toilet, a sink that dripped constantly. On the top bunk sat a man with tattoos crawling up his neck and arms, his head shaved close, eyes sharp and assessing. "Well," the man said, smirking, "what did you do to end up here, old man?" Miguel set his few belongings down carefully. "Nothing," he replied. "I'm innocent." The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete. "Yeah, funny thing, everyone in here is." "My name's Derek," the man said, "but everyone calls me Bones." Miguel nodded. "Miguel?" Bones hopped down from the top bunk, circling him slowly. "Listen, Miguel, you want to survive in here, you got to learn fast. Don't sit at the wrong table. Don't stare. Don't take favors." Miguel swallowed. "I'll remember." But remembering wasn't as easy as it sounded. The first few days were a blur of mistakes. Miguel sat at a lunch table that wasn't his and felt the tension spike instantly. In the yard, he accidentally made eye contact with the wrong man and earned a warning growl. One afternoon, he accepted a cigarette without realizing it meant he now owed something back. That debt nearly cost him. It was an older inmate who stepped in. "Leave him," the man said calmly, placing himself between Miguel and the others. "He's new." The men hesitated, then backed off. Later, the older man approached Miguel during rec time. He was gray-haired, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. "Name's Don Esteban," he said. "Been here a long time." Miguel exhaled, realizing only then how close he'd come to real danger. "Thank you," he said quietly. Don Esteban nodded. "You need guidance in here. Not strength, wisdom." That night, as the lights dimmed and the noise softened into a restless hum, Miguel climbed onto his lower bunk. He stared at the ceiling, heart racing, mind replaying every moment that had brought him here. He thought of Rosa, of Mateo and Lucia, and for the first time since his arrest, the fear fully set in. This place wasn't just punishment, it was designed to break men. Miguel turned onto his side, folded his hands against his chest, and whispered a prayer into the darkness, not knowing yet that this cell, this block, and this prison would become the battleground where his faith would be tested like never before. Don Esteban moved through Cellblock with a quiet authority that no one questioned. He wasn't big, he wasn't loud, but when he spoke, men listened. Some nodded in respect, others simply stepped aside. He had been inside for over 20 years, long enough to understand that survival in prison wasn't about force, it was about awareness. Miguel stayed close to him whenever he could. During yard time, Don Esteban explained the invisible lines that ruled the place. "Here," he said softly, gesturing with his chin, "everything has meaning. Where you sit, who you talk to, what you accept." Miguel nodded, absorbing every word. "I didn't realize a cigarette meant a debt." Don Esteban gave a faint smile. "Most men don't. That's why they don't last." They walked in silence for a moment before Don Esteban added, "But there's something else you need in here. Something stronger than rules." Miguel looked at him. "What's that?" "Purpose," the old man replied. "If you lose that, this place eats you alive." That night, as the lights dimmed and the block settled into its restless half-sleep, Don Esteban pulled something from beneath his mattress. It was a small Bible, its cover cracked, pages yellowed and soft from years of use. Miguel stared at it. "You still believe, after all this time?" Don Esteban chuckled quietly. "Especially after all this time." He opened the book with reverence. You think I survived 20 years in a place like this on anger? On bitterness? No. I survived because I learned that these walls can cage your body, but only you decide what happens to your soul. Miguel swallowed hard. I'm trying, he admitted. But some nights, it feels like God forgot me. The old man closed the Bible gently. Then let me tell you something, he said. Faith isn't feeling God close. Faith is choosing to speak to him when he feels far away. Those words stayed with Miguel. That same night, after Bones climbed onto the top bunk and turned his back, Miguel slid off his mattress. The concrete was ice cold against his knees as he knelt beside the bed. He hesitated for a moment, unsure, embarrassed, afraid of being seen. Then he prayed, not loudly, not with fancy words, just honest ones. He prayed for his children, for Rosa, for Don Esteban, and for strength to survive another day without losing himself. When he finished, a strange calm settled over him. The cell was still the same, steel bars, concrete walls, danger humming just outside. But something inside him felt steadier. From that night on, Miguel knelt every evening around 11 o'clock. It became his anchor, his quiet rebellion against a system that wanted to reduce him to a number. Bones noticed. Of course. So that's your thing now? He muttered one night. Praying? Miguel didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just kept praying. And though Miguel didn't know it yet, someone else was starting to notice too. Someone walking the halls at night, carrying a baton and a bitterness that had been fermenting for years. The real test of Miguel's faith was about to begin. By the end of the second week, everyone in Cellblock knew Miguel Rivera's routine. At exactly 11 a.m., when the overhead lights dimmed and the noise of the block softened into murmurs and distant shouts, Miguel slid down from his bunk. He placed his knees on the concrete, folded his hand, and bowed his head. Every night, no exceptions. At first, it drew nothing more than curiosity. Bones would glance down from the top bunk, shake his head, and smirk. You're really doing this every night, he whispered once. Man, if God cared about this place, half of us wouldn't be here. Miguel didn't answer. He never argued. He never defended himself. He just prayed. Some nights were quiet. Other nights weren't. A man down the tier laughed openly the first time he saw Miguel kneeling. Another muttered something under his breath about weak men and fairy tales. Someone else clapped sarcastically. Miguel heard it all, but he stayed on his knees. He prayed for Rosa, imagining her alone in the apartment, bills stacked on the table, doubts creeping into her heart. He prayed for Mateo, struggling in school without his father there to help with homework. He prayed for Lucia, who used to fall asleep holding his hand. He prayed for men whose names he didn't even know. And sometimes when his strength faltered, he prayed simply to survive the night. What surprised Miguel most was not the mockery, but the peace that followed each prayer. It didn't erase the fear. It didn't change the walls, but it steadied him, like a hand placed firmly on his back when the ground felt unsteady. Don Esteban watched from a distance. One night in the yard, he leaned close and spoke quietly. You're making yourself visible. Miguel nodded. I know. In here, visibility can be dangerous. Miguel considered that. So can losing yourself. Don Esteban studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fair answer. Bones, on the other hand, grew louder as the nights went on. You think praying gets you points or something? He scoffed one evening. Like God's keeping score up there? Miguel finally looked up. I don't pray to get anything, he said calmly. I pray so I don't become someone I don't recognize. Bones snorted. Suit yourself. Still, something had shifted. Even the men who mocked him began to lower their voices when they passed his cell at night. Not out of respect, more like discomfort. There was something unsettling about a man who kept kneeling in a place designed to teach you never to bow. Miguel didn't notice the guard at the end of the corridor that night. He didn't hear the slow footsteps pause. He didn't see the shadow stretch across the floor outside cell 47. But as Miguel whispered his prayer into the darkness, Officer James Thornton stood watching, jaw tight, grip firm on his baton, feeling an old anger rise inside him. And this time, he wasn't going to ignore it. Officer James Thornton had learned how to hide his pain a long time ago. At 38, he stood nearly 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who had spent years being trained not to hesitate. The other guards respected him, not because he was friendly, but because he was efficient. He followed the rules. He didn't flinch. And when things got ugly, he handled them. Before the prison, there had been the Marine Corps, 2 tours in Afghanistan, dust, explosions, screams that followed him home long after the war ended. He had held dying friends in his arms. He had seen children bleeding in the street while men shouted prayers to a god Thornton never saw show up. By the time he was discharged, the faith he'd grown up with was gone. His wife had tried to understand the nightmares, the sudden anger, the way he stared at nothing for long stretches of time. She lasted 3 years after he came home. Then she took their daughter and left. Thornton told himself he didn't care, but the empty apartment said otherwise. Working nights at FCI Florence paid the bills and kept his mind occupied. The routines were simple. The lines were clear. In prison, things made sense in a way life outside never did. There were rules, consequences, and control. And then there was Cell 47. The first night Thornton saw Miguel Rivera kneeling, something in him snapped. Not because Miguel was loud, not because he was disruptive, but because he was calm. That kind of calm irritated Thornton more than defiance ever could. He stopped in front of the bars, shining his flashlight deliberately across Miguel's bowed head. "What are you doing down there?" Thornton demanded. Miguel opened his eyes slowly. "Praying," he answered. Thornton laughed without humor. "Praying," he repeated. "You think your God's going to walk in here and unlock those bars?" Bones snickered from the top bunk. Miguel didn't respond. That silence felt like disrespect. Thornton leaned closer. "Let me tell you something. Rivera, if God was real, places like this wouldn't exist. Good men wouldn't end up in cages. I've seen what happens when people pray in real hells." Miguel met his eyes, not with anger, but with something worse. Compassion. "I'm sorry for what you've seen," Miguel said quietly. The words hit Thornton like a slap. "You don't know anything about me," Thornton snapped. "Get back on your bunk." Miguel obeyed, but the damage was done. From that night on, Thornton made sure to pass Cell 47 during every round. Sometimes he mocked Miguel openly. Sometimes he just stood there, watching, daring the man to look weak. Inside, Thornton told himself he was maintaining order. But the truth was darker. Miguel's prayers reminded him of everything he'd buried. His mother's Bible-gathering dust, the faith he'd mocked to survive war, and the quiet question that returned every time he saw a man kneel in a place built to crush hope. If God wasn't real, Thornton needed Miguel to stop acting like he was. And if breaking that faith required cruelty, James Thornton was more than willing to apply pressure. The harassment didn't begin all at once. It crept in, night after night, disguised as procedure. Thornton would stop at Cell 47 longer than necessary, shining his flashlight just a little too close to Miguel's face. He questioned him about nothing. Count times, bed alignment, whether his Bible was authorized property. Once, he took the book away for inspection and returned it 2 days later with a smirk. "Careful, Rivera," Thornton said one night. "You don't want to give me a reason to send you to solitary?" Miguel nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Inside, his stomach tightened. The other inmates noticed. "Man, that guard's got it out for you," Bones muttered from the top bunk. "You pissed him off or something?" Miguel shook his head. "I don't know." But the truth was becoming obvious. Thornton wasn't just enforcing rules. He was testing limits. The tension spilled into the block. One afternoon in the yard, Miguel sat on a bench reading when a younger inmate approached him. "You're the guy who prays every night, right?" the man asked. Miguel nodded cautiously. "Word is the guards are watching you," the inmate said. "That brings heat. Heat brings trouble." Before Miguel could respond, another man stepped in closer, eyes hard. "You trying to be holy in here? Think that makes you better than us?" Miguel stood slowly. No, I'm just trying to get through my time. A shove came out of nowhere. Miguel stumbled, nearly falling. The crowd around them shifted, sensing blood in the water. Enough! A voice said firmly. Don Esteban stepped between them, his presence instantly cooling the air. He's not worth your time, he told the others. Let it go. They hesitated, then backed off. Later, Don Esteban pulled Miguel aside. You're becoming a target, he warned. Not because you're weak, but because you're different. Miguel wiped sweat from his brow. I don't want trouble. Trouble doesn't ask permission, Don Esteban replied. And that guard, he's poking the hive. That night, when Miguel knelt at 11, the block felt heavier than usual. Whispers carried. Eyes watched. Thornton arrived midway through the prayer. Well, well, he said loudly. The saint of Cellblock is back at it. A few inmates laughed nervously. Thornton leaned closer to the bars. Let me ask you something. Rivera, do you really think praying in here makes you special? Miguel kept his eyes closed. No. Then why keep doing it? Miguel hesitated, then answered honestly. Because it's the only thing they can't take from me. The laughter stopped. Thornton's jaw tightened. You think you're untouchable? No, Miguel said softly. I think I'm human. For a moment, it looked like Thornton might explode. His hand tightened around the baton. Then he stepped back. Lights out, he snapped. Enjoy your fantasies while you can. As Thornton walked away, Miguel felt it, the unmistakable sense that something had shifted. The pressure was no longer random. It was focused, intentional. This was no longer just about rules or discipline. It was personal. Miguel climbed back onto his bunk, heart pounding, fully aware of how fragile his situation was. One wrong move, one accusation, one bad report. In prison, truth didn't always protect you. He stared at the ceiling, fear creeping in despite his prayers. And for the first time since he began kneeling each night, Miguel wondered, not if God was listening, but how much longer he could endure before something broke. Rosa came to visit on a gray Saturday morning. Miguel saw her through the thick glass before she ever picked up the phone. She looked thinner, tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Her eyes kept drifting, as if she didn't quite know where to rest them. They exchanged a few words at first, small ones. How are the kids? How's work? Questions that circled the truth without touching it. Then Rosa's voice broke. Mateo's been acting out, she said quietly. He got in trouble at school again. He says the other kids call him the robber's son. Miguel felt the words land like stones. I never, he started, then stopped. He already knew the sentence wouldn't help. Lucia cries at night, Rosa continued. She asks why God let you go away. Miguel closed his eyes. Tell her I love her. Tell her God didn't leave us. Rosa hesitated. That hesitation was new. Miguel, she said, lowering her voice, I've tried to believe you. I really have. But everything, the evidence, the video, the verdict, sometimes I don't know what to think anymore. The glass between them suddenly felt miles thick. I didn't do this, Miguel said, his voice steady but strained. I would never risk our family. Rosa nodded, but her eyes didn't meet his. I don't know if I can keep coming like this, she admitted. Every visit breaks me all over again. Miguel swallowed. Please don't give up on me. Rosa pressed her lips together, fighting tears. I need time, she whispered. Then she hung up the phone and stood. Miguel watched her walk away. That was the last time he saw her for months. Weeks later, an envelope arrived during mail call. Miguel recognized Rosa's handwriting instantly. His hands shook as he opened it, expecting a letter. Instead, he found legal documents. Petition for divorce? The words blurred. The room seemed to tilt. That night, Miguel didn't wait for 11. He slid off his bunk as soon as the lights dimmed and collapsed onto his knees, his body folding in on itself. The concrete burned cold against his skin as sobs tore out of him, raw and uncontrolled. I've lost everything, he whispered. My freedom, my name, my family. His prayers shattered into questions. Why, God, what did I do wrong? Where are you? Bones shifted uncomfortably above him. Hey, man, he muttered, unsure what to say. I'm sorry. Miguel didn't hear him. Footsteps stopped outside the cell. Thornton stood there, watching. For a brief second, just a breath. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. The memory of another man on his knees years ago, in a different kind of ruin. Then his face hardened. Get up, Rivera, Thornton said coldly. Men don't cry. Miguel lifted his head, tears streaking his face. I lost my family, he said simply. Thornton stared at him, jaw tight. Welcome to the club. He turned and walked away, but the image followed him. A man broken on a prison floor, still calling out to a god Thornton insisted didn't exist. And that night, long after his shift ended, James Thornton couldn't sleep. For Miguel, the darkness settled deeper than ever. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, clutching the divorce papers to his chest, feeling something dangerous creep into his heart. Not anger, not despair, but the quiet, terrifying thought that maybe, just maybe, God really had gone silent. The days that followed blurred together. Miguel stopped going to the yard. He ate just enough to keep his body moving and spent the rest of the time lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The prayers that once flowed freely now came out short and strained, if they came at all. God, if you're still there, he would whisper. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Don Esteban noticed immediately. You're drifting, the old man said one afternoon, sitting beside Miguel on the bench. That's how this place wins. Miguel didn't argue. He didn't have the energy. What if there is no plan? He asked quietly. What if this is just wrong? Don Esteban placed a hand on his shoulder. Then you stand anywhere, he replied. Not because it feels right, because dignity doesn't ask permission from circumstances. That night, Miguel forced himself back onto his knees at 11. The prayer felt empty, mechanical, but he stayed there. Footsteps approached. Thornton stopped in front of cell 47, his expression darker than usual. His eyes were red, the kind of red that came from sleepless nights and too much alcohol. Something in him was already boiling when he spoke. I'm sick of this, he snapped, striking the bars with his baton. Every night, same nonsense. Your God isn't real. Do you hear me? He's not real. Miguel opened his eyes slowly. For the first time in weeks, he stood. He walked toward the bars, close enough that Thornton could see the exhaustion etched into his face, but also something else. Resolve. Oreno. You're hurting, Miguel said calmly. Thornton stiffened. What did you say? You're angry, Miguel continued. Not at me, at God, because you lost people you loved, and he didn't stop it. Thornton's jaw clenched. You don't know a damn thing about me. I know pain, Miguel replied. I see it in your eyes. It's the same pain I feel. The corridor seemed to shrink. Thornton took a step back, his hand tightening around the baton. I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need your faith. Miguel met his gaze. Then why are you still fighting so hard against it? Silence. For a moment, Thornton looked like a man caught without armor. The anger flickered, replaced by something raw. Fear, maybe, or grief. Hope is a lie, Thornton said finally, his voice low and bitter. It's what people tell themselves so they don't lose their minds. We live, we suffer, then we die. That's it. Miguel shook his head gently. If you really believe that, you wouldn't still show up every night. You wouldn't still care. Thornton stared at him, breathing hard. Get back on your bunk, he growled. Before I put you in solitary. Miguel nodded and obeyed, but the words had already landed. That night, long after the block fell silent, James Thornton lay awake in his empty apartment, staring at the ceiling. Miguel's voice echoed in his mind, calm and unwavering. You're angry at God because you feel abandoned. Thornton sat up, rubbed his face, and muttered to himself, That's ridiculous. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had cracked open. just enough to let doubt seep in. Across the prison, Miguel lay awake too, unsure if he'd crossed a line or finally spoken truth. He didn't know it yet, but that confrontation had changed the course of both their lives. The war was no longer between guard and inmate. It had become something deeper, a battle between bitterness and belief, and neither man would walk away unchanged. James Thornton didn't go straight to bed after his shift ended. He stood in the parking lot for several minutes, staring at the prison walls as if they were something alive, something watching him back. The desert night was cold, unusually quiet. Normally, he welcomed the silence. Tonight, it felt loud. Miguel's words followed him all the way home. "You're angry at God because you feel abandoned." Thornton poured himself a drink the moment he stepped into his apartment, then another. But the usual numbness didn't come. His thoughts kept circling back to the same image. Miguel standing behind the bars, exhausted, abandoned by his family, yet still choosing to believe. It didn't make sense, and that bothered him more than anything. On a shelf above the television sat a book Thornton hadn't touched in years. He noticed it as he passed by for the third time that night. A thin layer of dust covered the black leather cover. A Bible. His mother had given it to him before his first deployment. "Just in case," she'd said. Thornton hesitated, then pulled it down. He sat on the edge of the couch and opened it at random. The words felt strange, heavy, almost intrusive. He didn't understand much of what he read. He didn't like how the sentences seemed to look back at him, as if they knew something about him. He snapped it shut. "This is stupid," he muttered, but he didn't put it away. Across the prison, Miguel lay awake in cell 47, staring at the underside of the top bunk. The confrontation with Thornton replayed in his mind again and again. Had he gone too far? Had he made things worse? The doubt returned, quiet, persistent. For the first time, Miguel didn't ask God for freedom. He asked for a sign. "Not for me," he whispered into the darkness. "For him. For everyone here who's hurting and doesn't know where to put the pain." He slid off the bunk and knelt, the concrete cold against his knees. "If you're still listening," Miguel said, voice trembling, "I need to know we're not alone." The prayer felt different, heavier, as if something had been set in motion. The next night, Thornton passed cell 47 and slowed his steps. Miguel was already kneeling, head bowed, lips moving silently. Thornton didn't mock him. He didn't say anything at all. He just stood there longer than usual, watching, studying the man he'd tried so hard to break and failed. Back in his apartment later that night, Thornton opened the Bible again. This time, he read longer. A story about a lost son, about forgiveness given before it was earned. He scoffed softly. "Figures." But when he finally lay down, something strange happened. For the first time in months, his dreams were quieter. Not peaceful, yet, but quieter. And somewhere between Miguel's whispered prayer and Thornton's reluctant reading, a seed had been planted. Neither man could see it. Neither knew what it would grow into. But the ground had been broken, and something was coming. 2 nights later, March 21st, the block felt different. Not louder, not quieter, heavier. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, uneven buzz, as if the electricity itself were uneasy. Most of the men in Cellblock were already asleep, their snores rising and falling in an uneven chorus. Somewhere down the tier, a radio crackled and went silent. At 11, on our P.M., Miguel slid off his bunk. His knees touched the concrete, his hands folded, his eyes closed. He didn't ask for freedom. He didn't ask for his family back. He prayed for James Thornton. "Lord," he whispered, barely louder than his breath. "He's hurting. He doesn't know where to put the pain. If you are real, if you hear me, please don't let him carry it alone anymore." Miguel stayed there longer than usual. Down the corridor, Officer Thornton began his midnight round. He walked slower than normal, baton loose in his hand, mind elsewhere. He hadn't slept much since opening that Bible. The words stuck to him in ways he didn't understand. He told himself he was tired. That's all. When he turned the corner into Cellblock, a chill crawled up his spine. The air felt thick, dense, almost pressurized. His breath fogged faintly, though the temperature hadn't changed. Thornton stopped, frowning. "What the hell?" he murmured. Then he saw the light. At the far end of the corridor, where the shadows pooled deepest, something moved. A figure stepped forward. Not a guard, not an inmate. The man walked slowly, barefoot on the concrete, yet his steps made no sound. He wore simple white garments that seemed to glow, not brightly, not blindingly, but with a soft, steady radiance that pushed the darkness back without effort. Thornton's heart slammed against his chest. His hand went to his radio. Nothing. He tried to speak. His throat locked. The man continued walking toward him, calm and unhurried. As he drew closer, Thornton saw the details: the long, dark hair resting on his shoulders, the beard neatly kept, the face marked not by judgment, but by a depth of compassion so intense it hurt to look at. Thornton stumbled backward. "Who are you?" he managed, his voice thin, unsteady. "How did you get in here?" The man stopped a few feet away. Then he spoke. "James." The name landed like a physical blow. Thornton's knees weakened. How do you know my name?" The man smiled gently. "You already know who I am. You've been reading about me every night." "No," Thornton whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't real. I'm hallucinating. I haven't slept. Do not be afraid," the man said softly. "I did not come to judge you." Thornton's eyes dropped to the man's hands. There, clear as day, were the marks. Ancient scars at the wrists, healed yet unmistakable. His breath hitched. "I didn't call you," Thornton said, voice breaking. "I didn't pray." The man turned his gaze toward cell 47. "He did." Thornton followed the look. Inside the cell, Miguel remained kneeling, eyes closed, unaware of what was unfolding just beyond the bars. "He has prayed for you for months," the man continued. "Every word spoken in faith is heard." Thornton's body shook. "This can't be happening." The man extended his hand. "Touch my hand, James." Every instinct screamed to run, to look away, to deny everything. But something deeper, something Thornton had buried under years of anger, pushed him forward. With trembling fingers, he reached out. The moment their hands met, warmth surged through him, not heat, but something alive. It rushed through his chest, down his arms, into every place he'd locked away pain. Thornton collapsed to his knees. The years broke open all at once. He cried, deep, shaking sobs that tore from his chest without shame. Images flooded him. The battlefield, his daughter's face, the night his wife left, every cruel word he'd spoken to men who were already broken. "I don't deserve this," he gasped. "I've been angry, bitter. I hurt people." "I know," the man said, kneeling beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I see everything, and I still came." Thornton lifted his head, tears streaming. "Jesus," he whispered. The man nodded. "I am here because you are lost," Jesus said, "and because my servant prayed." Thornton trembled, caught between awe and fear. "What do you want from me?" Jesus helped him stand. "Believe," he said simply. "And when you do, use your pain to bring light where there has been darkness." Thornton swallowed hard. "What about him?" He nodded toward Miguel's cell. "He's innocent." Jesus smiled, a quiet certainty in his eyes. "When you see him free," he said, "you will know this was real." Then he stepped back. "I must go now, James," Jesus added. "But I am never far." He turned and walked down the corridor, the light fading with each step, until suddenly he was gone. No sound, no flash, just absence. Thornton stood frozen, hands still warm, heart pounding. Behind the bars of cell 47, Miguel finished his prayer and lay back on his bunk, never knowing that his faith had just opened a door no prison could contain. James Thornton stayed where he was long after the corridor returned to normal. The hum of the fluorescent light steadied. The air warmed. Sound crept back into the block. Someone coughing, a distant toilet flushing, the low murmur of sleep. But Thornton didn't move. His hands were still trembling. He looked down at them as if they belonged to someone else. The warmth lingered, not on the skin, but deeper, in places he hadn't known were still capable of feeling anything at all. This can't be real, he told himself, and yet everything inside him said it was. He pressed his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the cold floor, breathing hard. The tears came again, quieter this time, but no less heavy. He covered his face with his hands, ashamed of nothing for the first time in years. Images replayed with brutal clarity. A friend screaming for help in a dust-choked alley. A child's eyes going still in his arms. His daughter standing in the doorway, asking why Daddy was always angry. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the empty hall. "I didn't know how to stop being broken." There was no voice now, no figure, but the words Jesus had spoken were still there, steady and unmistakable. Believe. Use your pain to bring light. Thornton stood slowly, as if afraid the moment would shatter if he moved too fast. He glanced once more toward cell 47. Miguel lay on his bunk, breathing evenly, unaware of how close heaven had come. "I won't waste this," Thornton murmured. "I promise." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Thornton completed his rounds, nodded to other guards, answered routine calls, but everything felt different, smaller, less final, as if the walls themselves had lost their authority. When his shift ended at dawn, Thornton didn't go home to drink. He went home to read. He opened the Bible with shaking hands, not flipping randomly this time, but searching. He read until the sun rose, until words that once felt foreign now burned with meaning. The lost are found. The broken are restored. Blessed are the merciful. He didn't know how to pray. Not really. So he spoke honestly. "Jesus," he said quietly, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I believe you were there, and I believe you weren't supposed to come for someone like me." He paused, then added, "Help me do what you asked." That night, Thornton returned to Cellblock a changed man. He stopped in front of cell 47. Miguel was awake, sitting on his bunk with the Bible open on his lap. He looked up, bracing himself out of habit. But the hardness he expected wasn't there. Thornton's eyes were different, softer, almost unguarded. "Rivera," Thornton said quietly. Miguel stood. "Yes, officer?" "I owe you an apology," Thornton said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "For the way I treated you, for the things I said, I had no right." Miguel blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "Are you all right?" Thornton nodded once. "Last night, something happened, something I can't fully explain." Miguel felt his heart quicken. "What happened?" Thornton hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Your prayers were heard." Miguel's grip tightened on the bars. "What do you mean?" Thornton met his eyes. "I saw him. Jesus. He spoke to me. He told me you'd been praying for me, and that your faith opened a door." For a moment, neither man spoke. Miguel's knees weakened. He grabbed the bars to steady himself as tears filled his eyes. "You saw him," he whispered. "Yes," Thornton said simply. "And I'm not the same." Miguel bowed his head, overcome. "Thank you, God," he breathed. Thornton continued, voice firm now. "He told me something else. He said you're innocent, and that I would know this was real when I saw you free." Miguel looked up sharply. "Free?" "I don't know how yet," Thornton admitted. "But I'm going to find out. I'm going to look at your case, every detail, and I won't stop." Miguel shook his head, emotion flooding him. "You don't owe me that." Thornton gave a faint smile. "No, but I owe him obedience." In that moment, something passed between them, something stronger than uniforms and bars. They were no longer guard and inmate. They were brothers in faith, and the mission had begun. James Thornton kept his promise. He didn't rush in with grand gestures or reckless moves. He knew the system too well for that. Justice, he had learned, didn't respond to emotion. It responded to persistence. On his days off, Thornton requested copies of Miguel's case file. He watched the mall security footage again and again, slowing it down, freezing frames, studying details no one else had bothered to question. At first, it felt hopeless. The same blurry figure, the same dark jacket, the same assumption. Then he noticed it. The robber in the video grabbed the display case with his left hand. Thornton leaned closer to the screen. He rewound it, watched again. The push, the grab, the angle of the wrist. Miguel was right-handed. Thornton's pulse quickened. He pulled the original police report. One line caught his eye, easy to miss, buried in routine language. Suspect shoved employee while fleeing. No mention of which hand. Thornton started asking questions. On his next day off, he drove to the mall and spoke to a former jewelry store employee who had been present during the robbery. She hesitated at first, nervous about reopening old memories, but eventually nodded. "I remember a tattoo," she said slowly. "On his neck. A snake. I think I was too shaken to mention it back then." Miguel had no tattoos. Thornton didn't sleep that night. He contacted an attorney he trusted from his military days. David Chen, a sharp, relentless lawyer who specialized in wrongful convictions. When Chen reviewed the footage, the reports, and the witness recollection, his reaction was immediate. "This is enough to reopen the case," Chen said. "But if we can find the real guy, it becomes undeniable." They did. A man named Marcus Webb had been arrested 2 months earlier in Phoenix for a string of nearly identical jewelry store robberies. Same method, same jacket, same snake tattoo on the neck. Chen filed an emergency motion. Miguel waited. Every day felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, hope pulling him forward, fear holding him back. Some nights he prayed with confidence. Other nights he prepared his heart for disappointment. Thornton never wavered. "If this fails," he told Miguel quietly one evening, "we keep going." But it didn't fail. At the hearing, the judge reviewed the new evidence in silence. Left-handed footage, witness testimony, Webb's confession to multiple robberies during the same period. The courtroom felt suspended in time. Finally, the judge spoke. "This conviction represents a grave failure of due process," he said firmly. "Mr. Miguel Rivera should never have been incarcerated." The gavel struck. Conviction vacated. All charges dismissed. Miguel didn't breathe. Then the words reached him. "You are free." His knees buckled. Tears came before sound. Thornton closed his eyes, remembering Jesus' words in the hallway. "When you see him free, you will know this was real." Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit Miguel's face like something holy. He fell to his knees on the steps, not in despair this time, but in gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you." Thornton helped him up and drove him home. When Rosa opened the door, she froze. Miguel stood there, thinner, older, but free. "I told you the truth," he said gently. "Always." Rosa broke down, sobbing, apologizing, clinging to him as if afraid he might vanish again. Mateo and Lucia rushed forward, wrapping their arms around their father. The family stood there together, healed but still healing. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were scars, therapy sessions, conversations that took time and patience. But the foundation was rebuilt, not on denial, but on truth. Miguel found work again. Rosa withdrew the divorce petition. Slowly, trust returned. And Thornton, he became a different man inside those same prison walls. He treated inmates with dignity. He listened. He intervened where others ignored. Eventually, he started a small Bible study, not preaching, just listening, sharing. Men who had once mocked Miguel now asked questions. Don Esteban was granted parole months later. Miguel welcomed him into his home like family. What began in Cell 47 didn't stay there. Miguel and Chen eventually founded a small nonprofit, Faith and Justice, to help inmates with credible claims of innocence. They didn't save everyone, but they saved some, and that was enough. One quiet evening, months later, Miguel sat in his backyard watching his children play. Rosa called him inside for dinner. As he stood, he thought just for a moment he saw a familiar figure near the trees. White garments, a peaceful smile, then it was gone. Miguel didn't chase it. He didn't need to. He knew the truth now. God had never been absent in that prison hallway. Faith had never been wasted. And justice, though delayed, had never been denied. If this story touched you, remember this. No cell is too dark, no heart too broken, no injustice too buried for God to reach. And if you want more stories like this, stories of faith, justice, and redemption, make sure you subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us, because light still walks with us, even in the darkest places.